Hello, scholars, and happy Friday. As promised, I am trying to upload this video so that you guys can be familiar with the information that is in chapter 2, as we didn't actually have enough time to discuss chapter 2 in class on yesterday. I'll try to cover everything that's going to actually be on the assessment. And I really wanted to mention that when you're working on the Smart Book assignments, that's not really like a quiz or a test or anything of that nature. It's really just a learning resource to help support what we learn in class. So essentially, we're going to go over things in class. And now that I realize we're not going to have time to cover everything in class, we're going to be going over some things in some videos that I'm going to be uploading. But beyond that, I'd like for you to do the Smart Books assignments to basically reinforce what we're discussing in class and through our online platform. So all of this is to help prepare you for your presentations as well as for the midterm and final assessments that you will be taking. So basically, when you do your Smart Book assignments, if you go through and complete the assignments, typically you will get 100% for those assignments, regardless of how many you get wrong, as long as you learn the concepts and you're able to complete the entire assessment, or it's not an assessment, the entire activity. So we do want to talk about ethics. We want to go through the information that's in chapter 2. And I want to start off by basically discussing the fact that ethics is really a system of moral principles. When we think about morals, we think about what we personally consider to be right versus what's wrong. When we think about ethics, we think about those concepts, those ideas about what's right or wrong within a particular system, within sometimes an organization or a society, or even within a culture. I think a culture is a better way of saying it. So we think about things like business ethics. We also think about the idea that people have come together to formulate guidelines and principles about what is right or wrong, what's fair or unfair within particular societal groups or within cultures. So why do we care about ethics? We really need to think about ethics in terms of communication, because there's so much room for error. When we think about communication, we recognize that there are a few rules to communication. One, communication is inevitable. Because of the definition of communication, the fact that communication is using messages to generate meaning, we know that there are a number of things that can be considered messages. We have verbal messages, we also have visual messages. So simply being present in a space within a context or situation, we can generate meaning just by our presence. So we know that communication is inevitable. In addition to being inevitable, it's irreversible. So once we send a message and that message has been decoded, we can't unsend that message. So because we know that communication is inevitable as well as irreversible, it's important that we're mindful and cognizant of the messages that we're sending, and that we're being responsible when we're sending those messages. This has been an understanding for several years, thousands of years. We've been studying ethical usages of information. So if we were to go back several hundreds of years and think about some of the philosophical presentations that have been made, we might think about something like the study of utilitarian ethics. I believe, Jeremy Bentham presented utilitarian ethics, and he discussed how ethical standards are really based on the value or the utility of the action or what has been presented. So you can really be ethical if you recognize that there is great good in what is being said or what is being performed. It's almost like the Robin Hood mentality. If Robin Hood can steal from one individual and help several by stealing from one or from a few, then the outcome justifies the means. So that idea of maybe I can tell a white lie that really isn't going to hurt anyone, but it's going to cause some great degree of assistance or help, that would give you some idea of what that type of ethical standard means for various individuals. Other individuals like Immanuel Kant, who presented deontology, which is based on the golden rule, suggested that you could be ethical communicators or ethical people in general as long as you are mindful that you shouldn't do anything to another individual that you would not have them do unto you. That's the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's another ethical standard that is really strongly presented hundreds of years later. Another ethical standard is what's known as Nicomachean ethics. Nicomachean ethics was presented by Aristotle. And Aristotle basically said that as individuals, as people, we act on proper function. And proper function is basically doing what you're naturally supposed to do. Everything has a proper function. And for humans, our proper function has a social aspect. And because we naturally want to be social individuals, Aristotle suggested that we're naturally going to do ethical things because we don't want to be ostracized. We don't want to be looked down upon. So we're going to act in ethical ways. He also suggested that there are three things that must be done in order for someone to be considered ethical. And I think that's on one of these slides. One of those things is that an individual has to have common sense. And when Aristotle talks about common sense, he's really not talking about what we think about in regard to common sense. He's really saying that you need to be knowledgeable about the topic that you're discussing. So as you can see on this slide, it says you should be fully prepared. If you're going to converse about something, if you're going to talk about it, if you're going to share information, this needs to be information that you have researched, information that you have proven to be factual, information that you're truly knowledgeable about. Additionally, Aristotle suggested that in order to be ethical, you must be honest. If you know the truth, then spread that truth. Do not say something that could lead someone astray, have them do something or think something that isn't factual. The last thing that he said is that you must have what's called a spirit of care. And when we say a spirit of care, we're basically saying that you should care about how the information that you share is going to impact the lives of those you share it with. So just like you see this that says avoid name calling or abusive language, it's mindful that we're thinking about how this information is going to impact those individuals. If it's not going to be helpful to them, then you shouldn't do it. And that's just an ethical principle that has been discussed for hundreds and hundreds of years. I can even say thousands because Aristotle lived in BC. I think around 340, 50 BC, he was making these suggestions about what's right and what's wrong in terms of communication. And just like I was saying, you don't want to say anything that could be harmful that's not going to be helpful. This is a great time to basically mention free speech and how you have to be mindful of free speech when we are communicating with individuals, because we know that in the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment, it's discussed that we have freedom of speech, freedom of expression, so on and so forth. There are very few things that are not protected by the First Amendment in regards to free speech. One of those in particular is defamation. Defamation is basically a lie. It must be false in order to be considered defamation, but defamation is a lie that is maliciously presented, meaning that whoever says this lie knows that this lie is going to cause harm. And additionally, this lie must cause some type of measurable harm. I have to be able to say exactly what I lost or what negativity I experienced based on this lie in order for me to file some type of judgment against someone for defamation. Another thing that's not protected by free speech is anything that could cause a clear and present danger. So something like being on a plane and yelling "bomb." When you yell "bomb," it could potentially cause panic. For all you know, someone may be there with a heart condition and they get extremely upset about the idea that they're about to die and they have a heart attack or something of that nature. But we want to be mindful that anything like that, yelling fire in a crowded space, causing some type of panic, that's not protected by free speech, which leaves a lot to actually be protected by free speech. So there are a number of things that you can say that might not necessarily be ethical, but would not necessarily be illegal either. So you have to be mindful of what you say. You don't want to be a bully. You don't want to mistreat people. Now, when we talk about plagiarism, which is something that is not acceptable at all, even outside of academia, we don't want to plagiarize because we want to make sure that, you know, we're treating people the way we want to be treated. We don't want anyone to steal our ideas or anything that we've worked hard on. So we definitely don't want to do that to other individuals. We want to give credit where credit is due. Now, because of that, we know that there are various ways that we can steal information, steal ideas. One of those is what's called global plagiarism. Now, when you think about global plagiarism, think about the actual globe. If you were to get a globe, what would that be? I think a globe is a model or a replica of the entire Earth. That's what I think. Now, when you think about that, same thing for plagiarism. If you replicate or if you make a model or a copy of someone's entire document, someone's entire piece, let's not just say document because there are other things that can be plagiarized also. If I steal an entire poem and say that that's my poem, if I steal an entire song and say that's my song, an entire piece that has been replicated or copied and is being passed off as my own, that's an example of global plagiarism. Patchwork plagiarism, if you've ever heard of a patchwork quilt where there are pieces that are put together, there are little squares in the quilt, and you put all those little squares together to make one entire quilt. Same thing with patchwork plagiarism. Patchwork plagiarism is taking pieces from various sources and passing that entire piece off as your own. So if I were to take a paragraph from one paper, a paragraph from another article, and I put those things together to formulate one plagiarized document, that would be patchwork plagiarism. Incremental plagiarism is basically characterized by plagiarizing in increments. A little bit here, a little bit there. So this is really common as several people would actually work on a document, their own original document, and then maybe realize that they're missing some information. And sometimes without even attempting to plagiarize, do so because they don't give credit to the originator of the information. So for example, if you were going to write a 4-page paper and you got to 3.5 or 3 3/4, and you realize that you need just a little bit more information, and you Google something and you find something that you can add, and you say, okay, I'm going to reword this a little bit. But rewording does not make it your new work. It does not make it your new idea. When you reword something that was written one way, but it still has the same idea, we call that paraphrasing. And paraphrasing requires that you give a citation, that you both include an in-text citation and you also include a reference. If you fail to do that, then that will be considered plagiarism. So if you include information from other sources within your original document without providing proper citation, that's known as incremental plagiarism. Now, the last slide that I have for you guys from chapter 2 focuses on ethical listening. So in the chapter, we talk about making sure that there's a balance between our ability and our desire to present information, but also receive information. We want to make sure that if we are willing to spread our truth, talk to individuals about what we feel and what we think and what we value, that we're also willing to accept the ideas and the opinions of other individuals and actually listen to them, not just receive their message or hear it. We don't want to just hear a message. We want to actually take the time to think about the message, evaluate the message, but not just the message, evaluate the messenger and what may be going on with them at that point in time without bias, without prejudice, in order to actually reflect on that message and process it in a way that lets us clearly understand what's being said. That's something that we're going to talk about in greater detail later this semester, but we do touch on that in this semester. That is the last slide, and I hope that's a bit helpful for your assignment that you're going to be working on before the end of the week. The chapter 2, Learn Smart, it's not Learn Smart anymore, the chapter 2 Smart Book assignment is due on Sunday at 11:59 p.m. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to send me an email, shoot me a text message, give me a call, whatever's going to work for you. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I'll see you next week.